Welcome back to another episode of Family Vacation. I'm your host, AJ Tenari. Last week, Matt took a look at Joanna Wong's most recent eclectic album, Hotel La Rut. Check it out if you missed it. This week, we're sticking with the new releases, as I'll be looking at an EP that gets better every time I listen to it. Today, we'll be discussing Connla's Well by Maruja. Connla's Well was self-released by the band on April 26th, 2024, and it is their most recent EP. Now, Maruja consists of Joe Carroll on saxophone, Jacob Hayes on drums, Matt Buonacorsi on bass, and Harry Wilkinson on vocals and guitar. This project is the first I've heard of this English post-punk band, and what a hell of a first impression. After listening to this EP, I cannot wait to listen to more of their work. Connla's Well is 20 straight minutes of apocalyptic grooves with wailing saxophones and distorted ambiance that discusses themes of mental health, faith, and conformity. In such a short amount of time, Maruja is able to pack quite a punch that's so easy to empathize with and go absolutely crazy to. And nowhere is this more obvious than the instrumentals. God damn, every band member just goes off on this EP, creating such driving soundscapes that complement the overall tone conveyed by the vocals. Now, my bias might be showing here, but I think this is especially achieved through Hayes' drum work on this project. On top of post-punk and post-rock, Connla's Well also utilizes jazz influences for its instrumentals, and the drums demonstrate this perfectly. There are so many offbeat grooves that really just drive each song forward, with so many accented hits and monstrous offbeat syncopations. The sheer speed and tenacity Hayes utilizes in his drumming style is so captivating, and it just gives this EP so much energy. Whether it be the almost drum and bass style beat on The Invisible Man, or the constant crescendoing fills on Resisting Resistance, the drums are a major highlight all throughout. And while I love this fast-paced style of drumming, I especially appreciate the more subtle moments when Hayes backs off the kit. Going back to Resisting Resistance, this instrumental track closes the EP and acts as a final cathartic send-off with each member getting a moment to shine. And this is helped by Hayes' brilliant dynamic control that never compromises the song's momentum. This may sound like a simple thing to praise, but just hearing one of Carroll's sax solos in the foreground, with Hayes still tearing it up in the background, is always a joy to listen to. Speaking of Carroll, the saxophone work might be what makes this project for me. A lot of the melodies come from Carroll's sax lines, which is very cool for a post-punk album to do. They're the instrumental focus a lot of the time, through various solos, accented moments, or peppered ambiance. And they just always work whenever they're utilized. I especially love the softer accented hits that open up Resisting Resistance. There's just something so peaceful and comforting about how they sound and the way they hit you. I also really love their utilization on Zeitgeist, sounding almost like an alarm in the beginning, warning you of what's to come, before it picks up with a wailing solo being backed by some accented full band hits. Now when the saxophone isn't in the spotlight, the guitars take over the heavy lifting, and let me tell you, they really set the mood with the sea of distortion they're buried in. Connla's Well is drenched in this suffocating feeling of dread that's achieved through the sheer power of Wilkinson's guitar work. The sounds Wilkinson is able to make with his instrument are really impressive, and work both as ambiance and melodies. On The Invisible Man, we see some great ambient guitar work, with the wailing trills backing up the bass during the break before the choruses, the accented offbeats backing up the saxophones after the chorus, and the bits that are all distorted towards the end, which are so chaotic they sound like planes crashing. Another highlight goes to One Hand Behind the Devil, where during the end the guitars just steal the show, with the main melody being overtaken by these panning, spacey sound effects, sounding like something's about to blast off. The utilization of guitar on this project is just very cool to me, and I think it's very inventive for such a condensed project. The bass work on this album is probably the only area I have a problem with on this EP, but that's not because of the playing, it's more so the mixing. Buonacorsi's bass is tuned very low, so it can be kinda difficult to find it in the mix, besides the obvious moments when it's being utilized, such as the thundering bass lines leading to the vocal passages on Zeitgeist, or the accented hits on One Hand Behind the Devil. And that'll act as a nice segue into the mixing of this album, which is very clean for a project of this caliber. With the exception of the bass, everything can be heard very clearly, with instruments going from the forefront to the background at appropriate times. And even with an EP that's caked in so much distortion, it's never a distraction and always serves to enhance the tone and sound of the project. It's a precarious balancing act, but it's handled very well. Also, special shout out to the use of channel panning on this project, as it really makes the guitar work shine, and adds to the overall ambiance whenever utilized. My favorite example is probably the rumbling, growling distortion that tears from right to left after the verses of One Hand Behind the Devil. I think the only concern I have with the mixing is the bass work, but I feel like that's a product of the sound Maruja's going for, and the bass appears enough to where it isn't detrimental when it's not there. Moving on to the vocals, like the instrumentals, they're very solid. Harry Wilkinson's delivery pretty much sees him on the verge of rapping, as most verses are done in a spoken word style with a bit of melodic flow. I'll say your enjoyment of his vocal delivery will vary depending on your own taste, but I think it works perfectly for this project. Considering the tone, sound, and concepts described on this album, Wilkinson's rambling stream of consciousness delivery perfectly matches the hectic high-speed nature of the instrumentals. His presence is just very commanding and foreboding, as if he's preaching cautionary messages of personal demons. I'd say vocal highlights go to The Invisible Man, as we really get a nice blend of the spoken word and melodic deliveries between the verses and choruses respectively. And he especially shines towards the end, where everything just keeps building and growing louder, creating such great tension, amplified by him crying out the truth it hides. I also really enjoy how chaotic and hard-hitting his vocals are on Zeitgeist. It's very sporadic and classic punk, going more in on the rambling spoken word style that complements the crunchier sound of this track. Plus his delivery of the lyric "Liar, Lord take me higher" is just a big brain scratcher. And now, since I brought up some lyrics, let's move on to those. Now, as a non-lyrics guy, the lyrics on this project really weren't the focus for me, as I was naturally drawn to the music. But upon my re-listens, there are some pretty profound topics discussed in Maruja's unique style. The track with lyrics that stood out to me the most was The Invisible Man. This song discusses the concept of dealing with mental health issues in unhealthy ways, such as by hiding your emotions or not dealing with them at all. I think it's a topic that a lot of people can relate to, especially now, and Wilkinson's in-your-face, almost panicked delivery really conveys the feeling of spiraling out of control while suffering in silence. I think the standout lyrics for me happen in the second verse. "The gaze you cast was absent. When you were there, it wasn't you. A shell of who you were before the hurt inside there grew. Drew down on your emotions, volcanic ruptures brew, colder as the days go by like early morning dew." Now, it's nothing groundbreaking, and this track also has a habit of leaning on easy, cutesy rhyme schemes, but just the raw emotion and the way Wilkinson paints this picture of isolation really resonates with me. I'd say the other track for lyrical highlights is One Hand Behind the Devil, which utilizes such vivid, haunting imagery to portray the struggles of faith and the corruption of power. It's almost medieval in its descriptions of broken systems, with its use of body horror and mystical comparisons to the devil himself to represent societal corruption. Now, Zeitgeist lyrically is fine, it just didn't really do much to stand out to me personally. And then the other two tracks are instrumentals, so not much to say there. And with the lyrics taken care of, I think that'll bring me to my final thoughts. Overall, Connla's Well is a brilliant showcase of what this band has to offer in such a condensed format. The musicianship is definitely the highlight for me, with each member working in tandem to create this super frantic, anxiety-inducing atmosphere that leads into the darker themes conveyed on this project perfectly. Whether it be Hayes' thundering, fast-paced drum fills, Carroll's foreboding, enriching sax melodies, or Wilkinson's apocalyptic, distorted guitar riffs, Maruja as a unit are brilliant at creating ambiance. The vocals and lyrics also back this claim up, as Wilkinson's sporadic delivery of these, at times, biblical lyrics really add to the overall dark, kick-ass tone found across this whole EP. If I had any complaints with this project, it would probably be the production, but even then that's a nitpick, with my only gripe really being in regards to some of the bass mixing. For a self-released album, the mixing is very solid all throughout, and sounds really clean with the exception of the bass at points. But this is not nearly enough to detract from the sheer force of sound this band is able to achieve. I'd say the only other thing that might take away from this EP is that it can sound a little repetitive at times, with the middle track specifically sounding kinda similar. But I do genuinely feel like there's enough diversity in the sound of these songs to give them their own unique identity. So, with all that said, I'm giving Connla's Well by Maruja an A tier. And so far, it's my favorite EP I've listened to this year. That'll do it for this week's episode of Family Vacation. Have you listened to Connla's Well? What'd you think? Feel free to let us know. Thank you all for listening and for your constant love and support. As always, I'm your host AJ Tenari, and Matt, we'll see you next week.